It's in the affliction.
It's inside the affliction.
Very good. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good job. The title of today's Dharma talk is It's Inside. It's inside the affliction. What you're looking for is, it's a way of talking about it. It's inside the affliction. The thing you keep continually trying to turn away from, to cover up, to blame someone or something for. This is just another fancy way of avoiding things, is to look for what caused it. It's not that there isn't something that caused it. Of course there is. But if you chase that, it's like chasing rabbits. I mean, they run away, or they change, or they morph into something else. And you use a lot of energy going after that. Again, I'm not saying there aren't ways in which this works totally perfectly. And that's why it fools us, is because we materialize things, like Trungpa Rinpoche's book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, using spiritual techniques to get to a higher state, more peaceful, more. Less difficulty, more and more nice stuff, blue skies, perfect temperatures, and so on. That's why it's so difficult, is because it's so seductive. The cause and effect situation is everywhere. Apple falls from a tree, cause, and it hits the ground with thump. We hear it, cause and effect. That kind of thing is happening everywhere. It's the nature of dependent origination, pratitya samutpada. But what the mind does with that is it fascinates, or fixates, and gets fascinated by the movement. And it can operate lots of different ways. It can operate as threatening you, the movement. It can operate as being entertainment. This is sometimes called sports. Any kind of movement that's happening can entrain you or magnetize you into its realm, into its activity, and touch on, trigger aspects of your own consciousness that, especially someone with no mind training, that it just thinks it's me. That's just how I feel. That's just how I am. Oh, I've always been that way. Well, I was taught that. That's how I am. So it's like the person is endeavoring to do what? Accept themselves. So they have a little autobiography as a backup all the time for who they are. And that needs to be reinforced. You need to continue to chat with yourself. I'm sure you've noticed, if you do much meditation at all, you notice that one of the things, when I say watch what moves is the mind stream, or the thoughts in the mind stream. And that's where you need to look. Look right at the affliction. Look right at the difficulty. Whatever you're experiencing, I don't care how much it sucks. And I don't care how entertaining or magnetizing it is. Just look at it. This is why I don't teach a form of meditation that is about shutting anything out or closing down or trying to train yourself to be some kind of a special meditation accomplisher person. This isn't to say that isn't appropriate for some people. If you're listening to me, there's maybe a couple dozen people listening at any given time. That's enough. You don't need any more. And there's not going to be that many people who are going to connect with or be interested in this particular way of training the mind, because it's a difficult one. It needs a lot of support from Sangha community. It needs a lot of study, not just studying your favorite Dharma book over and over. And it needs a lot of there's a big emphasis if I am involved in community. And this doesn't mean getting along with everybody. I don't have any requirement like that. What I do have is stay in touch with everyone, especially the people that are the most challenging or difficult or seem to be the most, what's that fancy word? Yeah, those guys. Stay with them, and doesn't mean you agree with them or you have to go along with what they say, but you could just receive whatever's happening with them. Some people just need to be heard, even if they show up to you as being full of themselves. Sometimes I know where things are, sometimes I don't. So in Nagarjuna's Dharmadhatu Stava, the 101, I think it's 101 verses, in Praise of Dharmadhatu, in praise of the realm of truth, in the 2nd century of the Common Era. He says, and this is a particular translation, if you read other translations, it'll show up in different ways. He says, enlightenment is neither near nor far. It does not go away nor come to you. Right there in the cage of your afflictions. Either you will see it or you will not. Interesting sense of humor he has there. You're always looking at it. You're always looking at the very difficulty that you are trying to solve, avoid, get away from, or that feels like crap. This is why we have a practice of meditation. This is why Buddha taught this 2,500 years ago, and why teachers down through the century teach us to be aware of what's happening. I say, hold very still, sit down, sit in a symmetrical position, get everything as symmetrical as you can without struggle, without warfare, and do not maintain it. This is a little bit different than the Zen tradition, or even the Tibetan tradition, where they even sit in wooden boxes and don't get up for weeks. I think they have some other kind of a tube running there. I don't know. But I would say pay attention to what moves. That means your body also. The body, mind, if you can stay there, of course, we know that already. Sit down, hold still, watch what moves. And you'll notice that the very affliction, it might not show up today, tomorrow, this week, but if you're persistent about it, eventually all of the cover-ups start to drop off. And they drop off because they need support. They need some kind of a pressure or some kind of a tension. So you could observe, you could sit down, hold still, and observe that movement in the mind. And then as I've been saying for years, if you feel really uptight and you feel like you can't sit there and look at the wall anymore, get up. That's why we don't have forms here that are like children's forms, where you have to get a permit to go to the bathroom. You should pay attention to your body. And this container, this environment, this meditation mandala or circle, if it functions in the way I've been teaching for a number of years, it breathes human beings. The human being that you are, sitting down, you're doing your best, you're sincere, you want to train your mind, and I want to help you. And what do I say? Watch what moves. And that movement may be, for the first half hour, maybe your thought, mind stream, your emotions, a memory about something that happened, or maybe just an intense feeling with no source. You just feel terrible. And I would say, if you can stay there, stay there. If you can't, get up. Make no excuses. You don't have to explain anything to the Eno or to your mom. But if you're in the Zendo, if you leave the Zendo, you would observe the form. You would bow as you leave. Always observe the form. When you get up off the cushion, if you're doing block sitting, you don't strike the gong at all. You don't mark that. But what you mark is the beginning, and 4 hours later, it's kind of an arbitrary number. Strike the gong again if you're doing it on your own. And then what moves in that 4 hours, that is your training. It will never particularly repeat itself. Well, it may. If it repeats itself a lot, then don't abandon the repetition for a conclusion about what the repetition means. Death comes without warning. So anything showing up is going away. If it seems to have some kind of maintenance, just watch it for a while. If you do nothing with it, you will notice it collapse. Nothing lasts. So in the cage of your afflictions, which means sit down, hold still, and watch that. observe, receive. That's the other way that I talk about it, is to receive whatever's arising in the mind stream, whatever's knocking at your door, whatever butterflies fluttering around your window. Allow that to come in. When I say allow, I'm just saying don't stop it, because if it's necessary for it to come in, it'll fly right through the glass. It'll fly through the wall. So in the cage of your afflictions, this is where it's at. That's the boundary or the barrier for each of us, and each of us have a different kind. As Zazen was talking about in his student Dharma talk about the seventh consciousness. There's different ways that this prevention of invasion or a threat to our self-centeredness shows up in different ways. Self-love, pride of self, self-reference, thinking that everything is about us. Anything that happens is immediately referred to ourselves. It's not about stopping that. Some forms, some teachers talk about cutting that off, and even I will say that in some ways, but I just mean to see it. And then if it comes time to get out the chopper, to get out the katvanga. The katvanga is the three-pronged harpoon symbolized in Tantric teachings that penetrates passion, aggression, and ignorance at once. So as you know, I have a background in Zen and also training in Tantric practices, which I don't particularly promote yet. I may and I may not. I don't think I had more than 10 or 15 minutes. And even that is not dependable. And I don't mind. I don't mind not knowing what's going to happen next. That doesn't mean I'm not watching everything that's moving. Like I say, watch everything that's moved. Watch everything that's moving. As soon as you conclude anything about what you observe moving, you stop watching the movement. But the illusion that you're still watching it is very strong because we are in a cage of our afflictions, and that cage might not look like a cage. It might look like freedom. Could look like anything. If it looks like freedom, then that's suspicious, because you can contemplate, as Nagarjuna says, verse 89, I think it is. In fact, I know it is. It's numbered here. Samsara's tendencies. In other words, up and down, back and forth, right and wrong, life and death, grasping and rejection, passion, aggression, and ignorance, hope and fear, jealousy, rage, thirst. Go on. You could go on. We could all make up words for the rest of the day. Bowling, fishing, trap shooting. Samsara's tendencies are ponderable. You can think about them. You can watch them. You can look at them. But this is the next line. The first line is Samsara's tendencies are ponderable. You can look and you estimate. You can investigate those, look into how they work when they move this way and that way. But freedom from tendencies is not ponderable. You can't think about it. And it's interesting that freedom from tendencies doesn't mean you don't have tendencies. It just means that you're not in a cage anymore. You're so much not in a cage that you can actually start having tendencies, and it's not a threat because there's no solid being anymore. There never was, but you can't find yourself. Nobody can find you. You can't find yourself, and you're not actually hiding. What's the Chinese word for hiding? We just learned a Chinese word for hiding. I was going to share it with you, but my memory can't remember. Samsara's tendencies are ponderable. Freedom from tendencies is not. You whatever you are completely inconceivable. And then the last line is, who could ever have the power to know you? How can something that's not separate be known in the conventional sense of black, white, red, blue, orange, large, small, present, not present? Zazen.
Jeez, I'm going. At the beginning of the talk, you said what you are looking for is inside the affliction. Is what we are looking for something that is in contrast to the affliction?
We might look at it that way, but it's actually not separate from the affliction. We start out as seeing it something separate, and then it's necessary to look at it and look at the tension. And let's say that if it's it could be anything from remorse, it could be anger, it could be hidden rage, it could be intense fear without having any idea what's causing it, or it could be just a simple abrasiveness somewhere in the background, a simple kind of grasping, or feeling a little kind of left out, maybe feeling. I'm just going through several of them. It could be feeling lonely, and at some point we just stop objecting to anything, but we also don't agree with it. So the passion, aggression, and ignorance is very, very subtle. We don't agree with that. We don't object to it. And we don't ignore it. And that's when the unreal structure, the structure of relative truth that we think is so true, starts to crack and come apart. We begin to see that there isn't. Nothing changes. Nothing goes away. Your intense fear, your suffering, it may come and it may go. You're no longer concerned with results, particularly more.
When we look at that affliction, and if we're just using an example of anger, is there a way to begin to see what we're looking for within the anger?
So it's just about looking at the anger. And the anger, if you just look at it and you don't explain it, if you just look at it and you don't object to it or run away from it or put too much, push on it too much, and you don't distract yourself away so you don't feel angry into any kind. It could be you could distract yourself by just lecturing yourself about don't be angry. You could go to the ninth grave precept, which is don't get angry. Well, there's no way you cannot get angry, but that precept needs to be there. It needs to be there so that you'll continue to bring your awareness to that. Those, as a Kobun Roshi, my Zen master, told me directly many, many years ago, you don't take precepts, you observe them. So that's difficult, because to continue to observe the anger, or to continue to observe that you're kind of out of control, or just using that to go to your direction with it is not a relative surrender to the anger situation, so that it doesn't boil over. It's actually not being separate from it. So this is why it's difficult, because the actual transcendent or non-materialistic approach to anger is about not separating yourself from it anymore. So therefore, you actually are the anger. Because as long as the anger is something happening to you, you'll want to push it down. You'll want to justify it. You'll want to say, I just can't stop getting angry. You'll have all kinds of scenarios, stage plays, and you'll write quatrains about the anger and so on, using that to express. So, but to just view it, this is why it can be so scary, is because the very anger, the very fear, the very tension, the very neurosis, the very cage of your afflictions that is arising, the way to work with that is just observe. Just observe that. And because if you try to do anything with it, it sets up a polarity. But it's difficult, because if you or me or anyone, if we think about that, we think, well, I can't do that. I've got to stop it. But otherwise, I could hurt somebody. I could hurt myself. I could mistreat somebody. But the only way around is through. have to go through it. So you will have to go into the very area that is challenging or sending you little thought balloons that this isn't going to work. This won't work. I can't do this. I can't do this. So why it's necessary to have the form that we all use, those of us who consider ourselves students of the Buddha's Dharma, the teacher, the teaching, and the community or the Sangha.
Melissa from Portland has a question.
Melissa.
She asks, if we look at our afflictions, what are we actually looking for, especially if the afflictions or troubles keep coming over and over again? Melissa.
That's why that's that way. It keeps showing up. You can ignore the cage because you're distracted into this ignorance. Or you can have stories about the cage, which actually makes it look like there aren't any bars. And you can it just seems to be necessary to continue to come back and keep it very minimalist is one word I've been using lately, and also radical. In other words, go to the root, the actual bar. See if you can see that. If you in your sitting practice of meditation, you can do it there. You can also just be you could say somewhat passive. You're just on receive. You just allow things to come up. And you and I and all of us, we've been doing this forever. We've been meeting like this forever. When I say forever, it's a way of talking about it. Just saying this energy keeps showing up. It's called human beings. But you're not limited to being a human being. There isn't anything you haven't been. And there isn't anything you won't be. The question is, are you going to wake up? Or are you going to continue to go into the darkness, go back into some kind of hiding or some kind of ignorance, kind of shutting down? This is an opportunity to awaken. And even if you've been practicing for 20 or 30 years, it seems to take a long time. But I would say, don't give up. I won't. I can't give up. I won't give up. Shoto bowing.
If we are
Louder, please. You can yell.
If we're acting on our afflictions, does that keep us from looking at it directly?
Like trying to stop it?
I'm saying we actually are still reaching out towards things
That you would identify as grasping, that is seems to be getting in the way. So this is a very, very personal. It's a good question, but it's very personal. But if you have a strong if you have a strong awareness practice where you're spending time sitting down, holding still, and just watching the movement, the movement you're watching in sitting meditation might not have to do with that grasping at all. But you might just be there. The common image I often use is you're just sharpening a blade. You're not cutting anything. You're just sharpening that blade, just observing. And it might be little tinker toy thoughts that go through your mind. You might feel like your kind of spontaneous conclusion about it is, well, this isn't getting anywhere. Watch that, because that's the way ego talks. That's the protection. It's like saying, there's nothing here. It's like the politicians will say, nothing going on here. What? You're trying to do what? It's a stage play. Don't believe it. Don't disbelieve it. And don't fight with it. So therefore, to respond more directly to your question, you may have to, if you're doing a lot of sitting practice, then when those kinds of grasping situations that you seem to be asking about come up, you'll be more and more and more clear about the way in which you want something else, the way in which you do that. So that's going to show up differently for each person. I might talk to 3 people and they have a similar question, and with one person, I would actively maybe give them some kind of a technique to stop doing that. I mean, someone else, I might say, just observe that. someone else, I could say, and I'm just letting you know what a wide range there is, a way of working with people. Some people I would actually tell them to stop practicing because of the way in which they're handling it. They need more more distance away from the sharpening stone because there's too much aggression going into it. Usually it's not that way. Usually people are lazy because they take after the teacher. Yes.
How should we include the teacher in the Sangha when our practice is changing in that way?
Just that would be your bailiwick there. That would be how it showed up for you. Everybody's going to do this differently. So I would say you talk to your student of mine, you talk to me. So I say you're doing that. You stay in touch with the Sangha. You live in a monastery. You're going to be unless you chicken out, you're going to be ordained as a monk here pretty soon. I'm watching you. I'm still watching you. Got that robe done? Yeah.
Zagu.
Hmm?
Zagu.
Got the zagu done? That's too small for a zagu. That wouldn't even cover. That wouldn't even. It needs to be big enough so you can actually bow. That's what we're talking about, a bowing mat there that he's supposed to. So
That's my out.
that you're out. Okay. I can't bow. I can't be ordained. Well, okay. Well, I'll ordain you in a few more years. Yes.
Question from Joseph in Kalamazoo. In addition to my virtual Spanish classes, I am required to teach a virtual class once a week titled Social Emotional Learning to my middle schoolers. Part of our curriculum is teaching mindfulness meditation, starting with 60 seconds focused on the breath. You've said that the mindfulness movement tends to encourage an identity of a meditator and not to encourage others to meditate unless they ask for it, and even then, very gently. What might be a good approach to work with my students given our circumstances and requirements?
That sounds fine. This is a requirement for them to do this. That's fine. How long was it? 60 seconds? Yeah, that's fine. That's not intrusive at all in terms of, I look for something that's intrusive into the self-centeredness, into the ego territory without having permission. And that's not enough but if you were making those young people sit for half an hour or something and following their breath, that would not be a good idea. But 60 seconds isn't anything, especially for the middle schoolers. They would be like 12. Yeah, that would be fine. Not a problem, Joseph.
Kevin bowing.
Yes, Kevin.
How might, I know this is situational, but how might using the Kadvanga on affliction show up in practice?
So Kadvanga, or the trident, the 3 points that shows up in Tantric images, like there's all kinds of choppers and bowls of blood and everything, trying to scare you into the situation or scare you out of it, one of the two, keep you away when you shouldn't and get you closer when you should. So they're just images, and it just means that if you see what this is, bang. It's not even a bang. If you see what this is, the passion, aggression, and ignorance no longer operate in terms of supporting some kind of imaginary self that needs to win, imaginary self that needs to lose, and an imaginary self that needs to run away or not, or just ignore the whole thing. So I think the technical term in Vajrayana is the Vajra-like samadhi, or the indestructible seeing of no separation. This would be along the lines of that trident, indestructible, because it's just it's not so much a piercing. That's a medieval image from that comes from the Pern tradition in Tibet, the shamanistic tradition, and also the ancient Indian tradition of Tantra. So those all come together back in the early centuries, 900,000, 1,100 years ago. And so that would just be a tantric image. And it seems like it's saying it can happen at once. You can do it all at once. You don't have to just work on one of the poisons or one aspect of the cage of your afflictions. That's my understanding of it. Zazen.
When we're looking at an affliction, does that also affect the afflicted? Is that a way to work with the afflicted?
Say more.
When I'm sitting and meditating, it seems that oftentimes my awareness is placed on the content of my mind and emotions. And I'm wondering if by observing that, that's also helping to see the observer as opposed to actually actively trying to put the emphasis on the observer.
So I think it's individual there. I think the idea is to watch what moves, and which is the afflictions, passion, aggression, ignorance, thoughts of the three poisons or whatever is arising, coming and going, just to observe that. I think that's the main practice, awareness practice, is just to watch what moves, and it can show up aligned with any one of those kind of energies, or it might be more flat or bland or not much happening. Fish in a stream, clouds in the sky, kind of ordinary, low level of entertainment. And it seems that awareness that is watching with a kind of objectivity, in other words, watch what moves, that will turn when there's less magnetizing going in the apparent otherness. That same awareness can spontaneously look for someone, or look for an observer, or look for a witness and not find anything, and not be able to see truly or fundamentally what's actually having the experience, who is having the experience, or who's observing. And so that can be done deliberately, as Ramana Maharshi taught in the Indian sage Mahasiddha of the last century, early part of the last century. Was a Atma Vichara, or self-inquiry, like who's doing this, who's thinking, who. I think a little bit of that can work, but I think it might be best to just watch what moves, and at some point spontaneously one could begin to investigate, and it would be different with each person. One person might just want to do that, a lot of that. Who is this? Who is this? Who's seeing? Who's smelling? Who's tasting? Who? Is there someone there? Is there an identity? This starts to crack into, in the Yogacara tradition, what is called, as you talked about yesterday, the seventh consciousness, the Klesha mind, and starts to move into that area with some kind of awareness that tends to go and look at that area where there's pride, where there's self-reference and self-love, and so on.
Teresa Ballin,
Yes, Teresa.
how is being or becoming the anger or the neurosis different than accepting it, Ballin?
So we have to use words, and they're very relative. And unless if you're trapped with relativity, you're going to be trapped with words. But seeing the entrapment is seeing the cage, and we have to start somewhere. So we begin to look at it that way. So what the ultimate seeing is seeing it's not separate. You're not separate from the anger. You don't have to get away from something that you're not separate from. It doesn't mean you are that fundamentally. You're just an angry person. There's no, the personhood is not there. Anger is just, as it's sometimes said in the Tibetan tradition, rangjong, or self-existing. It just shows up as it's it's difficult because you can't do this with the conceptual structures of relative truth. It's very difficult to describe it. So back to your question, if you could bring that back a little bit, and I'll go into deeper into the first part of your question.
Teresa Bowling, I was asking about the difference between being the anger
Yes.
and like trying to accept it and just,
Yes.
I accept this.
Yeah. And I'm saying, I would say, don't accept anything. Don't accept anything. Don't accept it. Don't accept anything. Don't, because it can, maybe not always, but it can function as a cover up that actually keeps you from looking at that deeply, because I'm just going to accept it. It's kind of a laissez-faire. Well, I've been fighting with this, but we start to tell our neighbors. That's usually a clue. If you start to tell your friends, relatives, well, it was giving me a lot of difficulty for a while, but I just accepted that. Just accepted myself. This is the height. Well, maybe that's the height, but it's 15 paces off the ground of self-centeredness. And it's very, very camouflaged and very difficult, because when you hear someone say that, you think, oh, good for them. They finally accepted that they have jealousy, or they finally accepted that they're this or that or the other thing. So it looks like some kind of a success story. This is spiritual materialism. And so I would say, don't accept, don't reject, and don't shut down. That's difficult to do unless you have a strong awareness practice, and unless you have a teacher that you can at least give the benefit of the doubt to. And also, I think what is required is not only that, but study the teaching, study the Dharma with Sangha, not just read books on it. I'm sure you've noticed, many of you have been reading Dharma books for the last several years, notice that some of them are very entertaining. It's just really cool to read this particular book. And there's other books that are miserable, because they're it's like a whole bunch of nuts and bolts rattling around in a pan and called concepts. And some people are very good at sorting those out, and will explain what this one means and what that, and how this works into that. And just a more involved and complicated evasion of what this is. Not that that's not important or valuable. We need to look at all of that. We need to look at the whole situation. But as far as accepting, rejecting, or ignoring, those three poisons can show up in very sophisticated and kind of muted tones. So we don't see the bright red, we don't see the deep black, and we don't see the rainbow. Yes.
Melissa from Portland has a follow-up, a couple of questions. She says, you have said you can actually live without not knowing what to do next. It's called authentic presence. What if this not knowing becomes or is an affliction and brings aggression? Sometimes it feels like since starting Shikantaza, I have more afflictions and I can't go back to just being normal.
You never were normal. Come on. You're here. I say, keep going. This is how it feels to step onto this path. As soon as you step onto the path, different for everyone, it starts to get rocky. It starts to get bumpy. It starts to there's sinkholes up here, things to trip over. Various forms of mental poison ivy start to show up, but you have a path. You actually have a path that has been followed by Parivrajakas, or searchers, or seekers down through the centuries. And some of them become sages. Some don't. But you're on this path. Just watch what moves. And what you're saying, it seems like you're getting worse. I'm kind of paraphrasing what you're saying. Well, of course, this is because you're starting to look at the stuff that when you were normal, you were covering things up. And you were just going to be normal. And you can go back to that if you want. Cover everything up, stop meditating, get 2 more dogs. And I don't mean that sarcastically. I'm saying just involve yourself in physical stuff, materialistic stuff that magnetizes you and uses up your time. And that will happen, not blaming you or accusing you of anything, but that can go on and on and on and on until your body mind goes back into the elements. This has been doing over and over and over again. But this is so much more complicated than any of us see, including this old man. That's so extremely complicated. If you want to see how complicated, look at the carpeting in front of you, or the floor, or the dirt, or whatever, or in my case, a little rug. Just look at that and look at how complicated that is. That's really complicated. What is that? If you break it down into its parts, you can't count all the parts that are right in front of you all the time. But it looks like one thing. It looks like an altar. It looks like a carpet. Looks like a table. Looks like. But is it? This is what you're doing when you're looking at your mind. You're looking at the parts that keep showing up that make up the illusion of someone who's living a life and knows that it's almost October. Those kind of thoughts continue to structure and support us as some kind of a real being living a real life. We've been doing this forever. So the contrast I'm about to talk about is look down and see how complicated that is. Now step outside if you're inside, or if you're outside, just look up. How complicated is that? It's vast. This is what starts the incredible vastness is what will start to show up in your mind, along with the petty mind that would like to get better, the petty mind that thinks that you're doing not so good, but other people are doing better. But it used to be, before I started meditating, I felt pretty good. I was doing okay. But now I'm feeling like crap because all these negative feelings are coming up. And yet here I am meditating. What's that about? I could say, in fact, I'm going to say, how do you think I feel? How do you think I feel? What do you think I was going through when I was 18 in the Marine Corps? That being is gone. That identity was there. I can remember some of it, but it was incredibly painful and magnetizing. I'm not here to complain about my life. I'm extremely lucky to have stumbled onto this path and into my guru. So I would say, if you can, just keep going and don't jump from one teacher to the next. If you have an issue with this teacher, then of course you might have to find somebody else. But I wouldn't spend too much time looking around. This doesn't mean that if you're looking to me, I'm this wonderful being you've been looking for. I probably don't show up all that comfortable to you. And if I do, you should let me know so I could be more cantankerous. Junju.
A question from Mary. You sometimes say you can see that nothing is separate. What about feeling that nothing is separate?
Could show up that way. I'm not sure if I'm addressing the question in a way that's helpful. Same seeing, feeling, you have feelings. You can see, you can smell, you can taste. Maybe you could taste that things are okay. There's even a rochig is a word in Tibetan that means one taste. It's a way of saying that there aren't any separate things. Everything tastes the same, but using the taste. Everything feels the same. For me, I'm a visual person. So when I say visual person, it just means that that's a strong, my sense fields, that's one of the strongest, that and thinking a lot. And so, yeah, I would say, yeah. The way you'll know if that's occurring is if you have agendas that keep showing up in the feeling that kind of dismiss that or make that the success story you've been looking for. Anything other than a direct perception of what this is. And to some people, that's going to show up as a direct perception of emptiness, and it was empty of what you thought it was. Or it can show up as a pure appearance, as what this is, which isn't exactly emptiness. Yes, sir.
If things are fundamentally the same taste or one taste, what do we do to that makes it seem otherwise?
Well, because of the self-centeredness, which is difficult to see, we want something, we want more. Instead of just seeing that that's the truth as it is, just that situation, we add on ideas about it, our thinking process. In your case, it would be thinking about things. You don't have any gaps in your thinking particularly. And when you do, you fill them up with thoughts. Don't agree with me. But don't ignore what I say either. Don't agree. You don't have to agree. Agreeing is a very low-level form of friendship. Don't agree. We talked about friendship. I think I gave a talk on that. I had my cousin, who was my stepfather's brother's daughter. She, so distant, but when we were, she was quite a bit younger, 7, 8 years younger. And she's not a Buddhist, not a meditator, but we kind of stay in touch. And she sent me a text not too long ago. It said, "I watched your talk on friendship. Very interesting." And I thought, that's quite a bit for her to say that. Someone who's probably an atheist. Choo-choo.
A question from Yarku.
From who?
Yarku? Does a dog have Buddha nature?
I don't know. I've not figured that one out yet. But I'm thinking that the ones next door are working on it because they howl all night long. So they're probably suffering. But I think their owner probably has Buddha nature. The dogs, I think, want that. I could take another question around that. We could talk about cats next. It says, "I don't know what I know until I'm asked." And if you ask me, then I hear it at the same time you do. I don't really think. You guys are doing all the thinking I need. Go ahead, everyone.
When you're bowing, just another follow-up from Melissa bowing. She
Yes.
says, "Thank you. Sokuzan challenges me. What a bugger." Have a good day.
I have her permission. I've talked to her a few times. So, even if she is, she in Oregon? No, she's in
Portland. Yeah,
She's in Portland. That's right.
all those fires.
Burned down yet. Yikes. Further, yes.
A question from Hassan. Yesterday in my meditation, I experienced that voice in my mind that's not me. It's just a random voice I have little control over. Now I keep thinking, if I'm not my mind, who am I?
Okay. What's the question?
I'm guessing it's, if I'm not my mind, who am I?
Let me check with, let's see. You are completely inconceivable. This is verse 89 written in the 2nd century of the Common Era by Nagarjuna in the Dharmadhatu Stuva, Praise of Dharmadhatu. He's saying that you are completely inconceivable. So there's no way you can know who you are. What's interesting is that when you find out who you are, you lose all interest in that because you see it's inconceivable. And then what do? In this lineage, you save all beings. You put everybody before yourself. And that's ego can't do that. So you have to actually see that ego is unreal. And when you see ego is unreal, you see the kind of reality everything else has is immanent and pure in appearance. And it's not a thought pattern. And it doesn't change. It doesn't come or go. Who you are doesn't come or go. You're neither born nor do you die. Don't believe anything I say. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here to chase you away if you're not ready for this. Go do something else. But if you're ready, I've only got a few dozen students. I'll help you.
A few more questions from Yarku. I've been doing Shikantaza for about 11 years on and off, but a while ago changed to focusing on breath with eyes closed because I didn't get results. How do I get results from Zazen?
Get a teacher. If you don't have a teacher, you're not doing Zazen. It's just self-indulgent. Unless you actually can do this yourself. And I think it's possible, but it's unlikely. If you're here asking me questions, then I would say you need a teacher. Not me. I'm not here to sell you anything. But probably need somebody that you can talk to directly about this. Because if you've been doing Shikantaza for 11 years and that wasn't working, you're just saying that you've been practicing spiritual materialism for 11 years. Well, no wonder it's not going to work. I mean, it will work spiritually, materialistically, probably 9 years or 10 years, you were able to still brag about it. To yourself, of course. Of course, you wouldn't brag to others. But you'll think that you have a pretty good practice there. And does that mean you were doing 20 minutes a day, 3 hours a day? I would have to know more about that. But closing your eyes, if you have a teacher, even closing your eyes and following your breath, if you want to do that, I'm not against that. I've done similar. I taught the following the breath practice for decades, practiced it myself. I don't do it anymore. But I'm not going to stop you from doing that. If you were to come to me and say, I really want to close my eyes, I'm going to say, go ahead, close your eyes. But that's what we do when we sleep. But if you want to awaken, you need to have all the senses open and on receive, and not block one out. Because all the senses are hooked together, so you close one sense, you close any sense, and all the other ones do the same thing in their own way. Everything else just shuts down, and that's why it feels good to do what S.N. Goenka taught to inmates in prisons in India in the last century. It doesn't mean that he didn't help people. Of course he did. My goodness, they were in terrible shape. Of course, sitting down, holding still, closing your eyes and scanning the body. Of course, that's going to be a hell of a contrast to being in a prison where everybody's fighting and mixing it up. But it's not awakening. It's just calming down. Whew. 10 days of calming down.
He has more.
Okay.
He said he was meditating 40 minutes a day, sometimes weekly, but sometimes would go a month or two without meditating. He's in England, and the only Zen teacher is on the other side of the country.
Doesn't matter.
He has more questions.
Well, it doesn't matter where these days. It doesn't matter where anybody's at. I never was in my teacher's back pocket. Neither one of them. They always lived a long ways away. Go ahead.
He says, occasionally I get a deep feeling in my stomach that tingles up through my arms, but I feel like I want to force it or concentrate on it. And it goes away, but it feels like I'm close to something big.
Bursitis. I'm not mocking you. I'm just saying, it's just another way of saying you're not. If you think you're close to something, you're not. So, but if you attain enlightenment in a few weeks or whatever, then come back and correct me. Say, you're wrong. Sokuzan, I was close to something big, but it doesn't sound like it. I never got close to something big. I must feel pretty good. Go ahead. He's got a lot of questions, doesn't he? You could write those out and send them.
He asks, I'm an ex-addict, still taking 10 milligrams of methadone a day and slowly reducing. It makes me feel normal. Can I still get Satori or Kensho from Zazen?
I assume you're saying while taking methadone. I don't know. I think there's a possibility. I think I can't rule anything out. The important thing is to, do it. And I'm biased here. Why wouldn't I be biased? I'm biased. I needed the 3 jewels. I needed the teaching person, what is being taught for 2,500 years, and a community to interact with who are also studying the same thing. I don't think you can do it on your own. And that being said, I immediately know, yeah, you could. It's just rare. It's even rare for someone to do this with a teacher and with a practice and with the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. If it's, so I don't know. For sure, I couldn't say for sure just based on what you're saying there. I think it's unlikely, but I don't know. Maybe if you work hard, you're definitely going to have to sit more than 40 hours or 40 minutes a few times a week. And having a Sangha is important. Community. And I have students who have drug issues of various kinds. So it's not something you can just, everybody has to be drug free, particularly. Sometimes you can't do that. So whether it's, maybe street drugs, but the so-called legal or prescription drugs are also, people are using them. Part of our culture. Any further questions? Any questions on Zoom?
And Sheldon has a question in the chat box.
Okay, you could read that and then we'll close.
He said, how does someone go about finding a teacher?
So, it's going to be different with everyone. I think there's so many. I mean, if you just went on, you'd spend the rest of your life, maybe, or several months or several years, maybe, if you went on and listened to on YouTube. And there's a lot of people on YouTube. Teachers are very, very magnetizing. And I would, if somebody has thousands of students, which some of them do, yeah, go ahead. See if you get a chance to talk to that individual. If you can't talk to the person personally, ever, if all you do is you're just someone in the crowd and you're just listening to the teachings, it's going to be difficult. It might feel really good, and you might really enjoy the teachings, and they might be spot on. Maybe they really magnetize you. But the evaluation part, the thinking process gets knotted up in that. It might be even better if you have a lot of resistance to the teacher. So, in your situation, I met you 10, 15 years ago. I don't know how long ago it was, Sheldon. And then you function as a student of mine, but your particular way of doing that is quite distant. I hear from you once in a while. Not a criticism. You're the one who sets the tone for that. Some people I hear from every single day, and I want to. If they want to contact me, but if they don't, I also don't. I mind my own business. I'll let you set the tone for that situation. So it's a difficult, so when I say how to do that, I would say, don't even look for it. See if that's something you really need. And as Trungpa Rinpoche once said, many, many years ago, better not to even begin. Better just, I think he was saying, just stay in samsara and keep fiddling around there and trying to figure out how to squeeze some happiness out of samsara. Maybe you can do that. But once you begin, better to finish. Stay in it. Stay with it. Practice it. And whatever is happening, whatever is showing up in that particular mandala of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the teacher, the teaching, and the community. Stay with it. Stay with that. Give the teacher the benefit of the doubt. Give the Sangha the benefit of the doubt. Give the teacher, the teaching, the benefit of the doubt. So don't believe it, don't disbelieve it, don't look away. Those are the three poisons. Those are the three traps, the way the self-centeredness gets trapped into believing this and not believing that. A lot of people ask a similar question: how do you find a teacher? I say, don't do anything unless you have to. But if you have to, then do it and don't look back. There is no reverse. If there's a reverse, if there's a way out, then you'll probably take it. Very good. So we can close.
mindfulness penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san shi fu shi so mu sa mo go sa the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.